The Skoda Yeti has always been one of those cars that polarizes opinion. Some people absolutely love it for its quirkiness, while others never quite understood why it looked the way it did. But whether you find its boxy design charming or odd, there's no denying the Yeti carved out a unique space in the compact SUV segment. Launched in 2009, it was Skoda's first proper attempt at building something that could straddle the line between a family-friendly hatchback and a capable off-roader. Its raised ride height, chunky styling, and practical interior meant it was immediately appealing to families, dog owners, and anyone who wanted more versatility than a standard car. Unlike other SUVs that leaned heavily toward either ruggedness or city slick style, the Yeti managed to offer a middle ground. It was compact enough for urban streets but tough enough for light off-road use. However, and this is the big point of today's video, just because the Yeti had a lot going for it doesn't mean every year of production is worth buying today. In fact, some years are plagued by serious reliability problems that can turn what looks like a bargain into a financial nightmare. That's why we're diving deep into the Yeti's history to figure out which years you should absolutely avoid, what red flags to look for, and what makes certain models such a risky choice for buyers. Let's begin with the 2009 and 2010 models, which were the very first years of Yeti production. It's pretty common in the car industry for first-generation models to suffer from what are called teething problems. This simply means manufacturers are still ironing out the bugs in a brand new design. Unfortunately for Skoda, these bugs were significant enough to make early Yetis a risky purchase today. Owners from these years reported a whole range of electrical issues, including faulty dashboard warning lights that would come on for no reason, glitches in the infotainment system, and problems with things like the central locking and window regulators. Some even reported that the car would randomly lose power to certain systems while driving, which was obviously concerning. On top of that, the smaller diesel engines, especially the 1.6 and 2.0 TDIs, were notorious for turbocharger failures in these early models. When the turbo goes, you're looking at repair bills that can easily run into the thousands, which often makes fixing the car uneconomical compared to its actual value. To make matters worse, because these are the oldest Yetis on the market, many of them have now racked up high mileages, meaning any of these early problems could easily be combined with age-related wear and tear. If you see one of these early cars for sale, it might be tempting because the asking price is low, but the potential repair costs are high enough that it can completely wipe out whatever money you thought you were saving. The 2011 to 2013 model years deserve their own spotlight, because this was when Skoda introduced the 1.2 TSI petrol engine into the Yeti lineup. At the time, this engine seemed like a brilliant idea. Downsized turbocharged petrol engines were the future. Efficient, punchy, and supposedly long-lasting. But in practice, the early 1.2 TSI engines turned out to be some of the most problematic engines in the Volkswagen Group's lineup. The main issue was the weak timing chain tensioner. Unlike a traditional timing belt that gets changed at set intervals, the timing chain was marketed as a lifetime component that never needed replacing. That sounded great on paper, but in reality, the tensioners and chains often failed far earlier than expected. When a timing chain stretches or slips, it can cause catastrophic engine failure almost instantly. Imagine driving to work one morning, hearing a strange rattling noise, and then suddenly the entire engine seizes up. That was a very real risk with these models. Online forums are full of horror stories from owners whose engines were ruined well before 100,000 miles. And because the repair often required replacing the entire engine, the cost could sometimes exceed the car's market value. This issue alone is enough to put most experts off recommending any 2011 to 2013 1.2 TS Yetis unless there's rock-solid proof that the timing components have already been updated with the revised parts. Without that, you're essentially sitting on a ticking time bomb. But the 1.2 TS wasn't the only problem in this era. These same years also suffered from major issues with the DSG automatic gearboxes, specifically the 7-speed dry clutch DSG that was paired with the smaller engines. In theory, the DSG should have been a fantastic addition. It offered lightning-fast gear changes, improved efficiency, and a sportier feel compared to traditional automatics. But in reality, the technology just wasn't mature enough at the time. Owners quickly started complaining about jerky shifts, especially in stop-and-go traffic, and premature clutch wear that made the cars almost undrivable in certain conditions. The real killer, though, was the mechatronic unit, the brain of the DSG gearbox. When it failed, which it often did, the gearbox would go into limp mode or fail entirely. Replacing or repairing the mechatronic unit could cost thousands of dollars. And in many cases, people simply scrapped the car because the repair wasn't worth it. Combine that with the timing chain issues on the 1.2 TSI, and you've got a recipe for some of the most unreliable Yetis ever made. Manuals from this period are safer, but even then, the engine itself is a big enough risk that most buyers are better off steering clear of these years entirely. When Skoda released the 2014 and 2015 facelift models, many people thought the worst was behind them. The facelift gave the Yeti a more modern, angular look, new interior tech, and some updated engines. And while these models did improve in some areas, they also introduced a fresh set of headaches, particularly for diesel owners. The biggest problem was the introduction of stricter emissions equipment like the diesel particulate filter, DPF, and the EGR system. On paper, these systems help reduce harmful emissions, but in real-world use, they created major reliability headaches. The DPF in particular is notorious for clogging if the car isn't regularly driven on long journeys. City drivers who only use their Yetis for short commutes found themselves constantly battling warning lights and reduced engine performance. Cleaning or replacing a clogged DPF isn't cheap, and it often has to be done multiple times if the driver's habits don't change. Then there's the EGR valve, which is designed to recirculate exhaust gases to lower emissions. These valves were prone to clogging with carbon deposits, leading to poor running, reduced fuel economy, and expensive repairs. In some cases, EGR valves failed within 60,000 miles, which is shockingly early for such an expensive part. These issues didn't affect every driver, but they were common enough that buying a diesel Yeti from this era without knowing the previous owner's driving habits is a serious gamble. Finally, we get to the 2016 and 2017 models, the last 2 years of production before the Yeti was replaced by the Skoda Karoq. By this point, Skoda had ironed out many of the earlier issues, and overall reliability was much better. However, these models still weren't perfect. For one thing, owners of four-wheel drive Yetis often complained about premature suspension wear. Components like bushings, control arms, and shock absorbers needed replacing far earlier than expected, especially on cars that were actually used for light off-road driving or heavy towing. This added to ownership costs and frustration. Then there were issues with the newer infotainment systems, which could freeze, lose Bluetooth connectivity, or refuse to update properly. While these aren't catastrophic failures like the timing chain or DSG issues in earlier years, they're still annoying problems that can make ownership less enjoyable. On top of that, because the Yeti was being phased out, some parts for older engines were already becoming harder to find. That means repair bills could be higher simply because mechanics had to wait longer or source parts at premium prices. Overall, these last models are definitely safer than the early ones, but they're still not flawless. So when you step back and take the Yeti's entire production run into account, the red flags become very clear. The 2009 and 2010 models, while charming as the pioneers of the range, are risky because they came with all the early production bugs that Skoda hadn't ironed out yet. These included annoying electrical glitches that could leave you chasing ghost faults, as well as more serious mechanical problems like turbocharger failures on the diesels, which could empty your bank account in one go. They might look affordable now, but they often carry the highest long-term risk. Then we move into the 2011 to 2013 models, which represent the biggest danger zone of all. These cars introduced the 1.2 TSI petrol engine, and with it came the catastrophic timing chain issues that ruined countless engines well before their time. Add to that the troublesome 7-speed DSG automatic gearbox, which had a reputation for jerky driving, failing mechatronic units, and clutch packs that wore out far too quickly, and you have a combination that could easily become one of the most unreliable compact SUVs on the market. If there's one group of Yetis you should be most cautious about, it's these. The story doesn't end there, though. The 2014 and 2015 facelift models might look more appealing thanks to their sharper design and updated interiors, but the diesels in particular introduced a new wave of expensive headaches. With diesel particulate filters, DPFS, that clog up during short journeys and EGR valves that fail prematurely, these cars can rack up thousands in bills if used in the wrong way. For buyers who mostly drive in the city, they are often completely unsuitable. Unless you're doing frequent long motorway runs where the systems can regenerate properly, these facelift diesels can quickly become a financial burden. Now, the 2016 and 2017 models improved things again, and by this point, Skoda had solved many of the earlier issues. These later models are generally the most reliable, but that doesn't mean they're perfect. Suspension wear, especially on four-wheel drive versions, was still a common complaint, with bushings, control arms, and shocks often needing early replacement. On top of that, the infotainment systems, while more modern, weren't free from glitches. Owners reported frozen screens, Bluetooth problems, and other frustrations that, while not catastrophic, chipped away at the ownership experience. Another factor is that as the Yeti was nearing the end of its production, certain replacement parts were already harder to source, which could make maintenance more expensive compared to a newer model like the Karoq. And finally, let's not forget the 2018 late-registered Yetis and special editions. On the surface, these can be tempting because they appear newer on paper, but in reality, they often carry the same mechanical issues as the 2017 models. Many of these cars sat on dealer lots for long periods before being registered, which can lead to problems of its own, like degraded seals, weak batteries, and other age-related issues despite the low mileage. So while they might look like the newest Yetis available, they're not necessarily the safest to buy. With all of that said, the safest choices, if you're serious about buying a Skoda Yeti, are usually the manual petrol models produced after 2014, or diesels that have been driven mostly on motorways by careful owners. These combinations avoid the most catastrophic problems and give you the best chance of finding a dependable example. But, and this is crucial, model year alone doesn't guarantee a good car. Service history and overall condition are just as important. A poorly maintained Yeti from a good year can still drain your wallet, while a carefully maintained example from a riskier year might still be worth considering if all the major issues have been addressed. In conclusion, the Skoda Yeti is one of those cars that can swing wildly between being an absolute gem and a complete money pit. Its quirky charm, practicality, and surprisingly solid driving experience make it a car that's easy to fall in love with. If you're shopping for a Yeti, remember the golden rules. Avoid the early 1.2 TSI engines. Unless there is solid proof the timing chain system has been replaced with the updated version, stay away from DSG gearboxes unless you are prepared for the possibility of major repairs, and think very carefully before buying a diesel if you only do short stop-start trips. Stick to the safer years. Always look for full service history, and never let a low asking price blind you to the potential problems hiding underneath. Done right, you'll end up with a dependable, characterful SUV that you can enjoy for years. Done wrong, and you'll quickly discover why the Skoda Yeti is one of the most frequently warned about used cars on the market.